Well, hello there. Today we are about midway through the Feast of Tabernacles. And like Jesus did in chapter 7, I'm doing my reflection in the middle part of Tabernacles. Just to be clear, I don't do pagan holidays and I am not a Torah keeper, but I do think it's important to understand what Jesus did and said and taught during these times and to reflect upon them. Okay, so we're reading in John chapter 7. Now, at the start of the chapter, Jesus is in Galilee because the Jews are trying to unalive him. He stayed in Galilee and he did not go to the feast with his brothers in Judea. So let's start reading in verse 3. His brethren therefore said unto him, Depart hence and go into Judea, that thy disciples may see the works that thou doest. Now, Jesus' brothers obviously wanted him to show off, and he wanted him to do all these works for his disciples to see. They couldn't understand why, if everybody likes to show off, why Jesus would want to keep all that to himself. So the brothers knew that the Jews were like that, and the Jews don't really look any different than the world at this point, do they? But Jesus is not like the world, and he begins to make distinctions that he is set apart. Verse 7, Then Jesus said unto them, My time is not come yet, but your time is always ready. The world cannot hate you, but me it hateth, because I testify of it that the works thereof are evil. Now right here, Jesus is making another distinction between his time and their time, which is always ready or any old time. Now, Jesus couldn't be possibly referring to his time of healing and miracles because he had already been doing this openly, and he was about to start doing even greater things like destroy the temple and raise it back up in 3 days, which is part of his resurrection. So if this is not about Jesus performing miracles at the feast, what is it about? What, when, and how long is his time? Furthermore, he talks about how the world hates him for pointing out their evil works. Moving on to verse 8, Go ye up into the feast. I go not up yet until up into the feast, for my time is not yet full come. So in other words, his time is near, but it's not here yet. Verse 9, When he had said these words unto them, he abode still in Galilee. So he stayed in Galilee, but how long did he stay there? Verse 10, But when his brethren were gone up, then he went up also unto the feast, not openly, but as it were in secret. So we know that Jesus started to teach midway through the feast, so we can kind of guesstimate that he probably showed up on, between day 1 and day 3, so that he would be there in time to teach in the middle of the feast. And this is why I'm doing the video today, because today we are midway through the feast, and this is all in accordance to what Jesus actually did. Anyways, so Jesus told his brothers, go without me, and he went by himself later in secret. But why did he do this in secret? Was Jesus being deceitful? Was he bearing false witness? No, he wasn't, because remember, he said in verse 8 that he wasn't going up yet. And this is for those people who are going to try to say that Jesus was lying to his brothers. That's not it. He just said that he wasn't going up yet. Move on to verse 11, 12, and 13. Then the Jews sought after him at the feast and said, Where is he? And there was much murmuring among the people concerning him. For some said, He is a good man, and others said, Nay, but he deceiveth the people. Howbeit no man speak openly of him for fear of the Jews. So the people were afraid to talk about Jesus openly, so they talked about him in secret, and they were debating if he was good or deceitful. And I find this very interesting because here we have Jesus at the feast in secret, and people talking about him in secret because they were afraid of the Jews, because they believed that Jews had the ultimate authority. And at the same time, the Jews are looking for him. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Jesus waits until the middle of the feast to come out of hiding and teach at the temple. But why did he do that? And what was his message? Verse 13 and 14. Now about the midst of the feast, Jesus went up to the temple and taught. And the Jews marveled at him, saying, How knoweth this man letters, having never learned? So in other words, the Jews thought that Jesus had no understanding of Scripture. So what was this nonsense that Jesus was teaching about? Verse 16, Jesus answered, My teaching is not my own. It comes from the one who sent me. Anyone who chooses to do the will of God will find out whether or not my teaching is from God or whether I speak on my own. So right here, Jesus declares that he's speaking the words of the one who sent him. And Jesus is saying that anyone who does the will of God will know that his words come from God. Verse 18, Whoever speaks on their own does so to gain personal glory. But he who seeks the glory of the one who sent him is a man of truth, and there is nothing false about him. So right here, Jesus makes sure that they understand that he's not speaking for his own glory like everybody else does. He's telling them that they should listen to him because he glorifies the one who sent him. Again, we can see that Jesus is not like the world. And they wanted to, unalive him. Now, Jesus and the Jews were at the same feast, weren't they? But they were not there for the same reasons. Everyone else was there celebrating the feast with their own understanding of obedience to God's law. But Jesus is there to point out the truth about God's intentions concerning the law. In other words, obedience to the law with no understanding of God's will does not glorify God, but it glorifies self, and thus disobedience and idolatry. Here's a little side note. Remember back in the garden when Satan told them that they would be as gods? This is how sin entered the world in the beginning. When man does things to glorify self, he is as his own God and is guilty of idolatry. Sorry, folks, it's the truth. The Jews not only refused to have the understanding, but they wanted to unalive him, and they called him demon-possessed. So, what understanding were the Pharisees lacking? Exactly what understanding did Jesus say we need to have in order to glorify God? This is the end of part 1, but look out for part 2, because Scripture is going to answer this question. Thank you very much for your time.